You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 71 of the DCAU Review. I am your host, Cal, and with me, as he always is, our other host, DCAU Review Twitter guru, Liam. Liam, we are kicking off a brand new series this week with our 71st episode. We are finished with Batman Beyond for the time being. Wrapped up a great week last week with Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. Got some good feedback on that. In my opinion, one of our best episodes to date. So if you have not heard that, make sure you check it out. But Liam, welcome into episode 71. We're kicking off a new series this week.
Yes, absolutely. This is our first time ever talking about Static Shock, which excited to do this one. I kind of watched as it was airing on Kids WB. I think I came in like late season 2, so getting a chance to rewatch some of these episodes that I probably only saw once or twice when they were on Saturday mornings at the time. I believe it also aired in reruns on Cartoon Network occasionally, but it didn't get the heavy play that some of the other series that we reviewed did in reruns. So it's interesting to go back and relive some of these episodes, some of these series that are a little less fresh in my mind. And eventually they did put the series out on DVD, but it wasn't until pretty recently, and so it wasn't a lot of like home video releases or anything either. So it was kind of just, watch it when it was on. That was your only chance to see it, because that was kind of pre-DVR still at that point. So, or, you go real old-fashioned, you could tape it off of on a VCR. But yeah, so it's been fun though to go, at least for this first episode, to go back and kind of relive the origins of this show that I really only kind of got to see the run through of one time.
Yeah. So, excuse me. This show debuted September 23rd, 2000, so we're coming up in just a few short weeks, or less than 2 weeks, Liam. It will be the 19th anniversary of the debut of Static Shock to the Kids WB, as you said. I don't have a lot of memories about Static Shock. I don't know if it didn't make as much of an impact or what my thoughts were on it, but I definitely don't remember. If you didn't jump in and watch it from the get-go, I definitely wasn't watching it from the get-go. And so I don't have a lot of strong memories about this episode in particular. I remember the excitement of the crossover episodes, which we may or may not be getting into next week. We'll talk about that as we wrap up today's episode. But I don't have a lot of strong ties or nostalgia or emotional attachment to any of the Static episodes. So coming into this was almost sort of coming in fresh from my recollection, and interested to talk about the episode today. Of course, the episode, we have not mentioned it yet, but the episode this week is the pilot episode called Shock to the System. And we'll get into our 4 categories in just a moment, Liam. But let's just talk briefly about Static Shock as a character. I know that he is near and dear, or was near and dear, to the late, great Dwayne McDuffie, who was responsible for creating him as a character, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, correct. Along with Dennis Cohen, I apologize if I'm butchering that, and Michael Davis, as well as Derek Dingle. Static was part of a line called Milestone Comics or Milestone Media. It was published by DC, but they were all new characters that were owned by their creators. And Dwayne McDuffie kind of being the head creative czar of this new universe. Characters like Icon and Static and characters that have popped up in other shows like Young Justice and stuff like that. They've shown up in the main DC continuity in the comics in more recent years as well. So at the time, it was mentioned, and Dwayne McDuffie had said in many interviews that one of the reasons that obviously the biggest thing is that it focuses on a lot of African American characters and Hispanic characters, people of different sexual orientations, things like that. And he said that one of the reasons he always wanted to focus on that with this is not because he wanted to have a token black superhero comic or anything, but that he wanted to just have more characters that that people of different upbringings, of different racial backgrounds could sort of identify with a little bit more. He mentioned that generally there may be a black character or two in certain other comics or TV shows, but that those characters struggle to be interesting because there's only one of them in what is maybe a predominantly white show or comic book. They have to represent all of black culture or all of Hispanic culture, and so they can't really do anything all that interesting with them. So creating this world and these characters that mostly focused on people of minority backgrounds was really important to Dwayne McDuffie, and I'm glad that carried over into the series. They were able to, it's a show about a young black superhero, and there are very few of those, especially shows aimed at kids, I think, at this point. So I'm glad that so many elements from that original series were able to carry over into the cartoon.
I guess my question for you is, has Static been used in the actual DC continuity? I know you mentioned it was Milestone. The way the Milestone worked, the creators owned the characters. Have any of those characters actually crossed over into the DC continuity?
Yeah, a few have. They actually did a storyline when Dwayne McDuffie was writing Justice League of America in, forget the exact era that was in like the late 2000, like 07 to 09 time, somewhere in there. I might have the dates wrong, but in that era when he was writing Justice League of America, he did a storyline where a bunch of the Milestone characters sort of cross over into the main DC universe. Characters like Icon and people like that showed up. And then Static has shown up quite a few times. There's been a couple times where I think the Milestone and DC partnership has ended over the years, and so the characters kind of disappear from continuity and then pop back up when a new deal is struck. But yeah, Static was for at least a brief time featured in the Teen Titans, in the main continuity, as well as I believe in the New 52 universe. He was part of the Ravagers, I believe. And so it kind of seems to depend on what the deal is with Milestone and DC from time to time. There was never like a long ongoing DC main continuity Static book, but he has popped up, as well as some of the other Milestone characters from time to time in the main universe, and then most recently in other media, you Static and Icon and a couple other of the villains popped up in this most recent season of Young Justice, as well as season 2 of that. So they do get to pop up from time to time, but they've never had like a long sustained run, it seems, as part of the main universe of comics, though.
And of course, those Young Justice episodes can also be found on the same streaming service, DC Universe, which of course we're not paid to shill here, but we'd be open to that.
But we would shill so hard.
We would sell ourselves just to be paid to sell you on the DC Universe. But
that's right.
If you're listening to this podcast, more than likely we don't have to sell you on that, because William, let's use that as a segue, because that's exactly where we watched today's episode that we're about to discuss, which we mentioned was Shock to the System, the pilot episode of Static Shock. Now, of course, Static, we didn't mention, but the reason why he's so pivotal to the DCAU universe was kind of ironic, because from the beginning, there's some debate as to whether or not he was ever intended to really cross over with the DCAU. Right. So I think from the get-go here, it doesn't necessarily feel, because it wasn't planned to be necessarily, it doesn't feel like a DCAU show to me, at least from my opinion. What were your first and general impressions of this, and then we'll get into the plot, and I'm sure you have a nice synopsis from the IMDb.
Of course. That definitely I think rings through in this pilot here, that it's like you said, there's some cheeky mentions or references to pop culture and things like that, but there isn't a ton of like direct referencing to anything. There's no direct mentions of Batman or Superman or anything like that yet. Like I said, this was debuted in 2000, so Batman Beyond would still have been on, but Superman and Batman would have finished up their runs by now, at least as far as like original episodes. They may have still been on in reruns at this time, but so it wasn't really clear where this fell and if this was its own thing, which it certainly appeared to be until, as we've alluded to a couple times already, later on, I believe the first episode of season 2, where Batman and Robin come to town, as well as a certain villain of that series also showing up. But it was as this first episode stands, it very much feels like its own thing, and we can kind of jump into plot here a little bit. It's a very, to me, and this was somewhat intentional. I know Dwayne McDuffie said that he sort of modeled the Static origin as like a modern day Spider-Man, and I think that when I was watching this, I thought, man, this feels like more of a Marvel origin story than a DC story to me.
For sure, absolutely, yeah. Good segue. We'll jump into plot here, Liam. So let's kick us off with our official IMDb synopsis here in your best announcer voice, please.
I will do my best. Although this might be the weakest IMDb synopsis I've ever read, but here we go. And the synopsis for Shock to the System, which was written by Christopher Priest and directed by James Tucker. The synopsis reads as such. A boy, Virgil, gains electrical space superpowers after exposure to a strange gas. And that's it.
All right. Well, I don't think that it's necessarily reflects badly on this episode, the fact that the synopsis is so short and to the point, because let's jump into plot. Okay, my 2 cents. And I went back and forth on trying to figure out how to score this, because you take it in a vacuum, you look at it, okay, they're finding their feet, brand new design team, brand new animation, it's not directly linked to the DCAU, Bruce Timm has nothing to do with this, it's somebody that's worked on stuff with him before, and would eventually work on stuff with Justice League, so maybe doing some of the pre-production for the Justice League cartoon with him, but it's not a Bruce Timm production, so character designs are completely different. The budget would seem to me to be smaller, I would think, because of that, or it's very, very streamlined. It's streamlined even beyond the new Batman Adventures or Superman animated series or even Justice League. It's much, much, much more streamlined. Very little character movement in certain scenes.
Not a lot of like changes in lighting and stuff like that. Just some of those like, the little je ne sais quoi that you got on those on the main DCAU shows. Yeah, you can definitely tell, and that changes. We talked about this a little off the air. Starting in season 3, there's kind of a big redesign of the whole series to make it look and feel a little bit more, I think, like it belongs in that DCAU world. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Stack's costume changes. Richie becomes Gear. He teams up with Batman and Green Lantern and Superman and the Justice League. So I think because he was going to be standing next to those characters a lot more as the series went on, they kind of do a redesign at that point, and the things like lighting and the animation I think definitely gets a little bit better. But yeah, this first season especially, you can tell it's a pretty bare bones production, or at least it certainly appeared to be.
I guess I'm not even talking about the plot. I'm talking about animation and visuals at this point. But
that's right.
As far as plot goes, anyway, my point was I was trying to see whether or not I should be as hard on this as I should, if I should cut it some slack based on the fact that I know that their budget was smaller. But at the end of the day, we are looking at this through a critical lens, and there are episodes of Batman that we love that we have been hard on. There have been episodes of Batman that we thought we were going to hate, or maybe that the story wasn't great, and that's why we break down the score and put it into different categories to come up with an overall score. With that said, the plot is difficult because it's really you had Last Son of Krypton and Superman, which you can hear our review of in the archives, but you didn't really have a Batman origin story. You had Rebirth for Batman Beyond, but it's not a superhero getting powers. And I think you're right. This felt very Marvel. It felt very, I don't know. The plot was ultimately what I gave the highest score for this, because it's just sort of middle of the road as far as plot is concerned. They start out by introducing you to him, and he sort of does a flashback into how he got his powers, which I thought was kind of a unique take, as opposed to just starting you out from the beginning and introducing you to him and then, oh, now he's got powers. So kudos to them for doing it that way, as opposed to just, starting from the beginning and moving forward. But I didn't think this plot was the strongest. The most conflict you have is a fight between a couple gangs. You get a seemingly PSA type thing where Virgil throws the gun into the harbor in the middle of a gang fight. There's some not really descript chemicals that explode and give all these thugs and him powers, and he doesn't go to the hospital the next day. He's just sort of, hey, I have powers now, and he immediately knows how to use all of them, and to his benefit. And then he flies around, stops the bad guys, and then helps in true teenage 14-year-old fashion, goes to help set up his homecoming at his high school. And the underlying sort of budding romance, and I guess it's sort of like a Steve Urkel subplot where he's like from Family Matters, where when he's Urkel, he has no confidence whatsoever, but then he switches to his alter ego and he's this suave, like, ladies man that he's able to talk to girls and gets his confidence. So yeah, I just made a Steve Urkel reference on this podcast. So
Yeah,
it tells you about where we are.
I would maybe more liken it to like an early Steve Ditko Spider-Man type story, where the alter ego.
I like Urkel.
That's fine too. It's a fair reference, and how many Stefan Urkel references are we likely to make over the course of this series?
I know, it's a good point.
So but it definitely has that vibe to it. It's the main point beyond telling the origin story is kind of just to introduce who Virgil / Static is, like what his personality is. He's basically nothing but quips in this episode.
Yeah, and they find out ways to let you know that his mom is dead without like saying, "Oh, your mom died." But then there's like exposition later on. Virgil, your mom died from gang violence. You're like, oh,
right.
It's a lot of conversational exposition.
Yeah, and that's actually something I was reading about the series before we kicked it off. And in the comics, Static's mom is alive, and part of that was because Dwayne McDuffie didn't want to do he wanted to have a black character that had sort of the more typical nuclear family, and not do the broken home thing. But I think by making it that his mother was killed, and not that she was she walked out on him or anything, I think you kind of avoid that stereotype of the broken home for the black kid. But
sure,
yeah, that was certainly an issue. They mentioned that. So yeah, the basic plot beyond the IMDb synopsis, where he gets his powers from the gas, is that basically he's being harassed and beaten up by this who I swear he's like 37 years old.
Yeah, there's two
Francis.
adults. I was like, why are these two adults in his high school?
Yeah, Francis, who becomes Hot Streak, just beats on him every time he gets a chance, and this other guy, Wade, is sort of sticking up for him, and Wade says basically, "Hey, if you want me to keep protecting you, you have to join the gang." And again, that's not light Saturday morning fare to talk about, like the idea of a kid in an inner city school kind of being, having to look to gangs to protect himself from other teenagers. Like that's certainly something that you don't see on a lot of kids cartoons, especially in that era. So
certainly not.
So I did appreciate they didn't, like we talked about in our little intro there, that they did not shy away from what these comics and what these characters a lot of times could be about. And but yeah, it's from there. It's just it's basically what you said, is that he gets his powers. He does a little fashion show and finds his costume, and then he just stops some thugs from stealing from a warehouse, and then shows off for the girl he likes. So, yeah, I guess we can get the scores here. I gave it 6 out of 10. I like it. I think it's a good static 101 story. I think maybe if it had been more focused, and the ending is kind of a cliffhanger as they go to the hospital and show all of these gang members that were caught in the gas sort of transforming into monstrosities, and then the end is Francis turns into Hot Streak and gets his powers, and so it kind of leaves you on a good cliffhanger for the series going forward. But yeah, I think it's because there was so actual little static shock in your first episode. I think that maybe hurt it a little bit, and maybe they could have benefited from like a 2-parter to start out or something, but they didn't go that route, at least not directly. So it's I think it's all right. I think it's good, and it's a good introduction to the character, but nothing great either.
Yeah, I gave it a 5 out of 10. So similar score. Like I said, I think for what they were going for, I gave them the kudos for being original and how they introduced the character and how they should reveal his powers. I think that the ending, I looked down at, it's only 21 minutes. It's less than 22 minutes on the streaming service. So I looked down and I think it was almost 18 minutes to go, and he had already wrapped up and taken care, or not 18 minutes, I'm sorry, with 3 minutes to go, with 18 minutes past, he had already taken care of everything, and really the gang violence scene was over at like 15 minutes. So he like got in his costume and everything was taken care of and wrapped up, and the police had come and picked up the bad guys, and he was out flying around and resolving everything at the end there. Just like, okay, this is it. Like, all right, everything's done. And the last 3 minutes are him in the school and setting up for the homecoming and flirting with the girl he has a crush on. And Rita. Rita. It's fine. Like it's fine. And I think it would have been better to have, I don't know. Yeah, maybe a 2-parter where they could focus on, and sort of is because of the cliffhanger, like you said, but it's not a lot of static, so it left something to be desired.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our next category, Liam. We touched on it briefly, so I probably won't have too much to add to it, but as far as animation and visuals are concerned, this is super low budget. My first thought when I saw some of the scenes where they're walking through the school was this done with MS Paint? Or like Flash, like
we haven't watched a Zeta project yet, but that from my memory it was a very similar animation style, these first 2 seasons of Static, to the Zeta project show. Similarly cheap looking animation, kind of like it's, and again, if you just let it stand on its own, maybe it wouldn't be so jarring, but when we come from these incredible the main 4 shows, it's tough to go from that to this look. And like we said, obviously it does get changed and redesigned later on in the series, but it's very jarring to go from, especially Batman Beyond or something like that has such a unique and slick style to it, and then go to this, which is as we mentioned, so bare bones.
Yeah, it's really, really jarring, and it's really, really, I don't know. I think it's hard to appreciate the beauty of some of the episodes of Batman the Animated Series. Then you come all the way down to this iteration of it. Like you said, there is a change later on where it looks more in continuity, I guess, animation-wise. But this is clearly not a very high budget, very, very cheaply made, and yeah, I think that reflects on it. My score for that was well, let me talk about one other thing. Character designs, Hot Streak or Francis, just what I guess it's early. He looks like an early 2000s. It's like if Fred Durst married one of the Backstreet Boys or something like that. He's got like a soul patch, and he's got frosted tips almost, and he looks, I don't know, and he's got his like boxers hanging out of his shirt, pulled up over his tucked in shirt. Just a weird look. The characters, I can't even describe what they look like. The character designs are not great though, very cheap. So I ended up giving animation a 2 out of 10.
Oh wow. Yeah, I was a little nicer to it. I just went 5 out of 10. I think it's because I kind of, when I looked at it, I just kind of figured out, well, it's not their fault, I guess. And I did think the one action sequence we got with Static, where he's taking down the thugs at the beginning, was pretty well done. But yeah, I mean, I don't disagree strongly with most of what you said. It's just
no disagreement alarm.
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't think it's enough of a disagreement for that. Score disparity, yes, but not a full on disagreement here. But yeah, it's certainly for everything we've already said. It's so basic and simple compared to, even as you mentioned, the new Batman Adventures look or something like that. There's so much less detail than even those shows. It's very jarring.
Agreed. Yeah. So I struggled with, should I take into account that this is from a smaller budget and wasn't necessarily meant to be DCAU centric from the get-go, but I have to sort of measure it up against the other measuring sticks that we've done, and we've given some poor scores to Batman the Animated Series.
Oh, sure. And I think I gave Batman the Animated Series episode 1 out of 10 at one point. So
yeah. So we got to be fair across the board with what I'm looking at. All right, William, let's move over to music. Music, actually, in this case, my score is actually reflective because there was significant lack of music. There's several scenes where it's just silence and no sort of background music at all. And it seems like there should be, based on the conversations being had. It's, I don't know. There is some decent music there. Not, I know that, I don't know if is it season 2 where they bring in Lil Romeo to do the theme
I think
song?
that's 3. I think it's season 3 because it coincides with the redesign of all the characters.
Okay, they're gonna get a huge pop from me for season 3 because that theme song is head and shoulders above, hands down. Yeah. The best of the Static Shock themes. So it's okay. Again, I don't have a lot of authority to speak on what they were going for as far as what they were trying to appeal to.
It sounds like with the theme song, it's kind of like Run DMC or DMX or something like that.
I don't think DMX is hard, heavy rap.
Yeah, but there's some like faster, dancier music. We had some faster, like dancier stuff too.
Okay, all right.
But it's definitely different. And well, that was actually something I thought about, because that's one of the things I remember from the show was that there was a lot of like 90s hip hop inspired. Like, I don't think they actually licensed much music, but they had a lot of like sound alikes for like a lot of like hip hop music. And some of the music that they have, other than the opening theme, is there's a lot of like there's just like electric guitar, like it sounds like a Batman Beyond soundtrack or something. And like when he's being cornered in the alley by Francis and his the other members of the rival gang and stuff, there's like this really kind of generic electric guitar going on. And same with some of the stuff with the actual gang fight, where do you think we forgot to mention this in plot or visuals, but do you think these cops were related to the SWAT team in On Leather Wings? Because they also fired tear gas right at a bunch of flammable chemicals and caused a giant explosion that poisoned a bunch of teenagers.
They were trained by the same like police sergeant or something. Yeah, they transferred him. Gordon got tired of him in Gotham City, so they transferred him to Kansas, or where does this even take
Dakota,
place?
The mythical city of Dakota. It's a city, so it's not. We don't know if it's in North or South Dakota, the state, but the city itself is called Dakota.
Okay, so we'll just pretend that it's like Dakota, regardless, whatever Midwestern state that Jim Gordon finally just got sick of his inept sergeant who's trained his SWAT soldiers to shoot explosives at chemicals.
Too many chemical fires in Gotham City. After like the fifth one, he finally got fired.
Crazy. Yeah.
Sorry, back to music.
Yeah, anyway, back to music. Yeah, sorry, we got derailed there for a second. Yeah, there's some generic rock music there, and I thought it added to, the music during the opening scene was fine, but there was a couple scenes, like I said, that were there was some passionate talk between Virgil and Richie regarding him pursuing the girl, Gina. Frida, whatever. See, I don't even know the characters' names. Frida. Good on me for getting Virgil and Richie, though. That's two, those are the important ones.
2 out of 3 ain't bad, as Meatloaf says.
Frida. So talking to get her, like, I feel like there could have been some mood music. Overall, not great music either. Again, you have to look at it. Is this DCAU? No, it's not DCAU yet, but we have to hold it up against the same things. Gave music 3 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm in that same ballpark, 4 out of 10. Like I said, I was waiting for a lot more like that 90s hip hop inspired music, and that never really comes. So it's a lot, like I said, it's other than the opening theme, and you kind of get a reprise of that near the end. It's mostly this very generic, like there's just some generic rock music in between. So yeah, 4 out of 10.
Man. Yeah, I think that actually that could have probably brought the score up a little bit. I think if we had if it had decided to go completely in a different direction, then all right, we're gonna use straight hip hop or jazz music or anything that isn't just generic background music that you couldn't find in like the 90s Spider-Man cartoon or something, then
Right.
would have been okay with it. But yeah, it's just kind of bleh. So, all right, Liam, let's move to our final category of the day, which is going to be voice acting. Of course, we have going to get a full introduction to our cast here. So let's talk about some of the players in today's game, shall we?
Yeah, we'll start with the guest stars as we often do, and then work up to the leads. Playing Francis / Hot Streak is Danny Cooksey, who, based on my ears, the voice I recognized when I was looking him up was he played one of the main villains on the cartoon Shaolin Showdown.
Okay.
Which was I really enjoyed that cartoon when I was 10 or 11 when that was on Kids WB. He played Jack Spicer on that show. A lot of other like small animation and comic or video game roles. So I think he's a good like menacing bully. As we've mentioned, because his design made him look so old, it really came across as like this 35-year-old man is bullying this 14-year-old, and nobody else seems to notice that he's way too old to be in high school. But yeah, I think he does a solid job as the sort of really the only strong antagonist of this episode. And then you had Omar Gooding as Wade, the other gang leader who played Terry's friend Trey or something like that on a couple episodes of Batman Beyond. So they're fine. And then you have the main cast. Virgil's dad is played by Kevin Michael Richardson, who's done a trillion voice acting roles over the years, plays the Joker on The Batman, stuff like that. So he's good as like the concerned father, although he maybe should be asking more questions about where his son has been. But other than that, and then we have our two main leads, which are Jason Marsden as Richie, who's kind of there to just be the wisecracking sidekick. And then you have, of course, the legend, Phil LaMarr, playing Virgil / Static Shock. And he's really good. I think he, like the lead, obviously the lead of your show is going to generally make or break it. And some of these dialogue, some of the jokes and quips they gave him, I think are groaners but because his delivery is so good, it feels a little more. It could have come off as really annoying, but because Phil LaMarr is so good, I think it comes off as more like kind of charming and, like I said, more of a Spider-Man feel.
I agree. I think that it's still finding its feet. I didn't notice who the voice director was for this, but I'm going to guess it's not Andrea Romano. Because of that, I feel like, with the exception of Phil LaMarr, it sounds like, I'm going to compare it, I guess, to 90s Spider-Man cartoon. Just over dramatic, overacting, just really not great. Wasn't a huge fan of it overall. Again, it's hard. It's really difficult because this is the first episode, and I keep saying that. And don't want to discourage anybody. If you're interested in checking this out, check it out, for the love of God. Like, for seeing something different than you're used to with the DCAU. Don't let this discourage you from checking it out. It's just not overall. It's not a smash hit from the get-go. They kind of find their footing and get better as things go on, from my recollection. And we'll have an opportunity to review a few of those later episodes in the upcoming weeks. But I ended up scoring. I cannot stand Richie. Richie sounds like he's been, cast. And correct me if I'm wrong, but he's the same guy that does Snapper Carr's voice. Is that correct?
Correct. Jason Marsden.
Yeah. I don't know. He sounds like a 40-year-old man doing a 12-year-old's voice. Not great. Anyway, I ended up scoring voice 4 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I gave it 6 out of 10. Should be noted, by the way, you mentioned Andrea Romano. She comes on as the voice director and the casting director in season 2. So you were right. She did not do this season 1, and I think that is reflected here. And I think you can just tell, and that was a good instinct by you, because I really wouldn't have thought to look that up. But yeah, she comes on in season 2 and takes over the directing from there. So that'll be interesting as we go through some of these other episodes the rest of the month to note if there's a toning down of some of the more I guess traditional cartoony elements of these voice actors. Because again, it's tough because as we've mentioned several times already, this wasn't necessarily meant to be a DCAU cartoon when it debuted, but because it is now, you sort of have to. You can't not compare it to that stuff. So yeah, I went.
I guess you can, but we can't.
Right. It's the DCAU review. Like if you're able to, if you're just watching this show by itself, I think it would be different. But if you're watching it as a part of this larger entity, you kind of have to compare it to that. And especially when there are so many talented voice actors working on this show. Yeah, if I didn't mention my score, I gave voice acting 6 out of 10. So I liked it a little bit more than you, but again, I think that mostly goes to the strength of Phil LaMarr as Virgil/Static.
Yeah, he's good, and of course, his better performances are certainly in front of him. We get some good ones, as we mentioned, in the crossover episodes, and then, of course, in one of the greatest of all the Justice League episodes, we get him as Future Static, and it's pretty awesome. Spoiler alert, pretty great. But we'll talk about that on another episode. Liam, I guess that will bring us to today's final score. That adding everything up, I have a final score of 14 out of 40. What about you?
Ouch. Yeah, I'm a little stronger than that. I'm at 21 out of 40. So that might be one of the bigger point disparities we've ever had for a final score.
I would agree. I don't know. I agree that we disagreed on this, so I don't know if that brings out the disagreement alarm or not. It depends on if I feel like editing it into this or not, but we'll figure that out. But yeah, I think overall, let's talk about rewatchability, Liam. I think that I don't know. I don't know that there's anything in this episode, unless you're curious to know how Virgil gets his powers. I think this is I think it depends.
If you're going to watch the whole series, then I think you should watch this because it is obviously it's his origin story, the origin of how all these they call them bang babies on the show, how they all got their powers through this gas and stuff. So it is important to that. if you just kind of want to watch like the cliff notes of the series and just see, the episodes that cross over with other DCAU shows, Green Lantern and Batman Beyond and Superman and those, you can probably just pick and choose those episodes and kind of jump right in if you only really care about, sort of where he is in relation to some of the other main DCAU shows, then you can definitely skip this. So yeah, it really depends. I think it's important if you're more curious about the series as a whole, but yeah, if you're just looking at it as what happens in the series that's actually important to the rest of the DCAU, then you can probably skip it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's probably not one that I'm going to come back and watch maybe ever again. But if it's your first time, if you haven't seen it before, or if it's been decades and you have the DC Universe subscription, it's 20 minutes. Get a refresher and then go watch those other crossover episodes. All right, Liam. Well, that will wrap us up for this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Now, as we mentioned, Liam, and alluded to several times and just mentioned, there are some crossover episodes. We have a sneak peek of what we might be looking at for next week's episode.
Yes, for next week, we are going to be looking at the Season 2 premiere, which is entitled The Big Leagues. And it'll be the first time Static meets a character from the larger DCAU. Meets a couple of them, in fact, as the Joker comes to town to recruit a new gang, and Batman and Robin show up to help Static stop him. So I'm excited to look at that episode. It is still the old art style, but to introduce some of those more familiar elements from the larger DCAU. Looking forward to tackling The Big Leagues next week.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, again for listening, whether you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or now, of course, as of today, we are now streaming on Spotify, so you can subscribe to us on there if you'd like to. Liam is going to tweet the link out. Liam, if they want to know where you're tweeting that link out, where can they find you?
You can head over to twitter.com and find me at DCAU Review on Twitter. Always post when new episodes comes out, and do tons of tweeting throughout the week, and retweet stuff, people giving feedback on our shows, memories of these various shows that we're reviewing, and other thoughts on the DCAU and DC Comics as a whole. So definitely head over to Twitter and follow us at DCAU Review. We actually just recently passed 400 followers. So Thanks to everybody for that, and let's keep it going.
Yeah, man, let's keep up the conversation. I was fascinated this week watching you guys talk about the canceled Static Shock Game Boy Advance game. That was it's pretty fascinating. So
yeah, me and Maddie and James from the Watchtower database did a little sleuthing, and were able to track down an ad that had appeared in a couple of DC Kids comics at the times, and apparently it got far enough that it got reviewed in a couple places, but never came out. So yeah, that was a fun little bit of that's just a sample of what you can expect from the
all made possible
Twitter experience.
That's right, all made possible by the wonderful website of Twitter. So I am Cal,
and I'm Liam,
and we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye bye.